all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. And finally, PuroClean. PuroClean is the paramedics of property damage. It provides water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold removal, biohazard cleanup. It also has a focus on veteran franchisees. You can learn more about them by going to puroclean.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including rss.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcast. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Robert M. Edsel. He's a award-winning author, a #1 New York Times bestseller. He wrote The Monuments Men with Brett Witter. Remember Us is the book we're going to talk about, American Sacrifice, Dutch Freedom, and a Forever Promise Forged in World War II. Robert, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you very much. Great to be back.
This is a good read, and I encourage others to go out and get it. We'll give you enough information in this podcast. You can go, wow, I want to know more, because there's so much to know about this. This is about the Netherlands, a specific region, and how the Dutch were treated by the Nazis during World War II, and then how they treated the Americans who came in to liberate them. But you do it in a method that I find very easy to read, sort of life stories about specific individuals who passed through here. This was a lot of work. How did you stumble on this idea, and did you ever think it would take this long?
Well, when I first became aware of it, it was actually just a person I wanted to go talk to. One of the Monuments Men's nephews, whose uncle was killed in combat. He was the one American monuments officer killed just a month before the war was over. Accepted an invitation to the Congressional Gold Medal awarding, honoring all of the Monuments Men and Women, and he RSVP'd yes and sent me a photograph and said, I just got back from England and I had a wonderful meeting with Frida, and he enclosed this photo of this woman with this crown of white hair, and he knew I knew her and I couldn't place her. I had no idea who it was for 3 or 4 days, and finally I remembered the only Frida I've ever heard of is this 19-year-old girl that lived outside Maastricht, who wrote Harvard a letter in September 1945 asking for the name and address of Walter Hutchhausen, the monuments officer who was killed, asking for the name and address of his mother because she wanted her to know that she walked 5 miles to the cemetery most days of the week to place flowers on his grave. And it had never occurred to me, I made reference to that in the Monuments Men, but it never occurred to me she was still alive. So she was. This is 2015 when I found this out, and I said to my wife, I want to make sure we go to London a few months from now, when we're headed to Europe, I'd like to meet this lady. And my wife said, do you have ambitions here? And I said, ambitions like what? And she said, well, like writing a book. And I said, no.
She knows you. She knows you too well. You were on the scent of something, even if you didn't know it.
Well, I really didn't. And I just felt like she was probably the last person to see Hutchhausen before he was killed. And I felt duty bound to talk to her. So 4 or 5 months later, I was there, and she starts pulling out these photographs of when the Germans, invaded in May 40. And then in September 44, when the Americans liberated them, and here comes this first tank over the hill. And she said to me, do you know about the Netherlands, about the American military cemetery in Margraten? And I said, you mean the Netherlands American Cemetery? Because that's what we call it today. And she said, yes. And I said, oh, I'm aware of it. And she said, have you been there? And I said, yes, I've been there. So you know about the grave adoption program? And I said, the what? And she said, the grave adoption program. And I knew nothing about it. And I couldn't believe I didn't. And that is what, charted the course for the next 8 years. That's how long we've been working on this.
Well, I think let's go ahead and explain what that program is right up front, because my guess is most Americans, most veterans, even World War II survivors and their families don't realize what is going on in these American cemeteries that are over in Europe, where our young boys and men died in World War II?
Good question. So there are 12 permanent World War II cemeteries that are run by the American Battle Monuments Commission in Europe and North Africa and in the Pacific. And they're, of course, beautifully kept. There's one in the Netherlands called the Netherlands American Cemetery, and it's near the town of Margraten, which is only 15 miles from the German border, from the town of Aachen, which is where World War II in Western Europe started, because the German tanks rolled across the border there. So the Dutch were neutral during World War I and had declared neutrality in World War II, which Hitler observed until he didn't. And they were stunned to lose their freedom. They hadn't had it happen in 100 years. They didn't have a resistance network. They didn't have a black market. They were disoriented. And when the Americans liberated this portion of the Netherlands, this is the very southeast portion of the country, they were so immensely beholding, and General Simpson's Ninth Army was stuck in this area because it became clear with the failure of Market Garden and the house-to-house fighting in Aachen that getting to Berlin by December 44 wasn't going to be possible. So Eisenhower decided to wait out the winter, resupply troops, fuel, etc. And the local people asked these boys to stay in their homes, to stay in their barns. They were everywhere, and they enjoyed getting to know them. And when the war was over, a lot of them didn't come back. And the Dutch families were grieving for them like American families were. At the end of World War II, there were 17,800 boys and a few women buried at the cemetery. It was our largest World War II cemetery in Europe at the end of the war. And as early as January 45, so still 4.5 months before the war's over, the people in the town of Margraten were trying to find an answer to the question, how do you thank your liberator when they're no longer alive to thank? And they came up with several different ideas, special masses and parades, and finally settled on this idea of asking one local person to volunteer to be an adopter to watch over the grave of one American soldier. And that meant going out to the cemetery on Memorial Day, Veterans Day, birth and death date. And if they had the names and addresses of next of kin, writing them and sending them a photograph of the grave. And that's how the program started. By the first Memorial Day in May 45, 80 years ago, they had about 300 of the 17,000 graves adopted. By May 46, a year later, all 17,800 graves were adopted. And to this day, there are today 10,000 boys and 4 women that are buried there, because about 8,000 were brought back. So a higher percentage retained there than at other cemeteries. And they have been at 100% adoption for 80 years. They have 1,000 people on the waiting list to be adopters, even though the turnover is only about 30 per year. but they only have the names and addresses of about 20% of the American next of kin because the Army and government refused to provide it. And that's, another element and purpose of the book. But that's the adoption program in a nutshell, and there is nothing like it anywhere else. There are some adoptions that occur at some of the other cemeteries, but no one started an adoption program during the war that has been sustained for 80 continuous years at 100%. It's unique by anything we can find anywhere.
And you write, and this was really powerful, that the Dutch adoptees view this not as a duty, but an honor. And it really is a way for the Dutch population to thank those who gave up their lives. I mean, you in the book talk to various people who lived through this. It really was viewed as an honor, not a duty.
Absolutely correct. I'm told by a couple of my friends in the Netherlands that when a divorce happens over there, it's one of the more hotly contested assets of the family because both husband and wife want to continue to be the adopter. So, in so many ways, the Dutch have become more American than many Americans in the sense that they know what Memorial Day is for. And it's not a 3-day weekend to go to the baseball park and eat hot dogs. I mean, that's certainly part of it. By all means, the freedom has paid for that. The freedom's paid to not know what Memorial Day is for. But I feel like all of us who were born in the United States, who have not served in the military, are lottery ticket winners. My dad was a Marine during World War II in Saipan, Okinawa, Nagasaki. And grew up in the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma. So he paid his dues. I haven't. I mean, I never was drafted, and selective service stopped before I had a chance. But this is my way of doing something I think that's meritorious to help the country and trying to remind Americans or inform them that Memorial Day isn't just a day to recognize men and women in service who've lost their lives to the benefit of the country, but also to celebrate what those lives paid for, which is our freedom. And it's not free. And what I've done in Remember Us is follow the lives of 12 men from 101st Airborne, 82nd Airborne, a chaplain, black gravedigger, the black tanker with 784th, some of everything, so that people can follow and understand just how horrific war truly is. We're not sugarcoating it. And then we go into the families' homes in the United States and describe what it was like for those families dealing with this. And not everyone in my book dies. Some do, some don't. But their lives all kind of converge around where this cemetery is, and for different reasons. And then there is this transcendent moment of the book, really the last third or so, that describes where war typically ends and we come home and we all move on. It describes what the Dutch have done to make sure that these men and women's lives are never forgotten. And they drill it into their children and their grandchildren every day. And this cemetery is filled with life for anyone that visits there. It's an amazing, amazing place.
Because this is swirling around, this is a story inside a bigger story of World War II. It swirls around different battles, air dropping paratroopers in from the air, and men who get caught and have to be rescued by either get shot or get rescued by the Dutch resistance. I mean, there's a lot packed into here. One of the things I didn't think about until I read this is, and I'm just going to use the initials, GRS. Explain that to us.
Well, I'm glad you asked about that. GRS is an acronym for Grave Registration Service, and the Grave Registration Service officers can be bookkeepers, they can be morticians, and then they're charged. Well, I'll come to that in a second. And then, of course, there are quartermaster troops that dig the graves, and in the Netherlands, that job befell Black Americans. We were more comfortable handing a shovel to than a gun. So I ask people, because this was a question that I had, what happens to a soldier when he's killed on the field of battle? I mean, when you think about movies or books, so someone's killed, that's horrible. And then you go to the next scene. We don't know. I mean, we never describe this, and it's gruesome and it's horrible, and it's costly. And I want, we describe this. I mean, it's the car wreck element of the story that everyone should know to realize war and loss of life is not a Game Boy. It's not a Nintendo game or a Marvel, blow up movie. It's a very, very serious matter, and it's painful to know about. But you need to know about it if you're going to learn that freedom isn't free, and if you're going to understand the remarkable things and the humane things that the Dutch did to try and honor these boys. So someone's killed. General Simpson promised his boys no one would be buried on enemy soil. They were loaded onto trucks. They were driven to Margraten, back across the border, right up until the end of the war, when it just became impossible to do that. They were laid out. The word like a cord of wood, or that phrase, is used often, where the bodies are stacked. They're brought in on trucks, the bodies and the body parts. They're laid out. They're taken into what's called a stripping line. It's dangerous work because live ammunition is a concern. In some cases, soldier may have a pin pulled on a grenade and his hands rigor mortis, or it's frozen. So they have to remove all the ammunition. Through the stripping line, they remove all personal identification objects. They inventory everything. They do an autopsy of the body or what's left of it. One of the dog tags is placed in the mouth if there is a head. The other dog tag is nailed to the cross to make sure there's no chance for misidentification. The bodies are carried out and laid outside on the other end of the stripping line. The black quartermaster troops then have to lift up the bodies. It's a very tactile job because there's no wood, there's no coffins. Everyone's buried in bed sacks. So they have to lift up the body or the parts and lower them into the bed sacks, and then they take them out and they're digging these graves in horrible conditions, raining all the time, always cold, sometimes frozen ground. And some days they were lucky to dig a single grave in a day. And they're trying to keep up with what's happening in the war. And to the Dutch's credit, when in March 1945, the battlefield casualties were so great and the quartermaster troops couldn't keep up with it, the call went out for local volunteers, and the townspeople of Margraten went to their tool sheds and got their shovels and went out there and helped dig those graves also.
Yeah, as I say, this is a piece of a story that nobody ever tells, so I thank you for telling it. It was very informative. Yeah, it's gruesome at times, but it makes you face the realities of war. One of the other things that you write about through a lot of the stories here in kind of a war-torn life, and we'd expect, and certainly you write about diseases and malnutrition, but one of the things that struck me was the role of religion, both for the Dutch residents of Margraten, as well as some of the American troops, because one of the ones you write on is a chaplain, Pat Folks, I think it is. Talk to us a little bit about what struck you about sort of the role of religion in World War II in the Netherlands at this time.
Well, that's a powerful question, and I compliment you for asking it. I think that 20-year-olds don't have an understanding of their mortality for the most part because they're fortunate, and at that life cycle, they haven't lost parents necessarily or friends. I mean, those are little ticking time bombs that impact all of us at different stages of our life. But of course, if you're a combat soldier, it's all around you. And you're cut off from your family. The only lifeline is our letters, and there's no phone calls, there's no modern day electronics, etc. And you're in that foxhole, and the only friends you've got in the world are those guys dug in next to you. You know, the old adage about there's no atheist in a foxhole. And I think that everybody's trying to find ways to feel some sense of encouragement, some sense of hope. I just don't think we as human beings fully appreciate how important hope is throughout lives. And I've spent so much of my life interviewing elderly people and a lot of time with the Monuments Men, 21 that I knew, and then so many of their family members. And I could see what happened to them when they were late in life. They felt bad. They'd lost family members, including children. They'd lost a lot of their friends. And And then here people were interested in them because of the book or the movie. People wanted to talk to them. They didn't get looked at like old people. And that hope was everything. It kept them going, and it gave them a pep to their step. So, for these 20-year-olds, I think religion was a hugely important matter because it was something to believe in and hope for, whether they were 100% in or not. It was, there just were so few options. And where the Dutch were concerned, our key figure in the book, this remarkable woman, Emily Michels van Kestnik, who was the wife of the mayor of Maastricht, mother of 12. She was extremely Catholic and very much a person of faith. And she always felt like that belief was well-founded, and she was constantly trying to encourage people. Our young lady in the book, Frida, who I knew the last 8 years of her life, she would tell the American boys who were so fearful and scared in between battles that would come by her house, she could talk to them because she was the same age they were. And she would try and encourage them and buck them up and tell them, if you accept Christ is your savior, if you believe, these things will all work out. And she told me how good she felt seeing the boys drive off in the truck, knowing that they were scared to death, of course, but they had a little bit of sense of relief and a smile on their face. So I think it's hugely important.
Well, it certainly rings through this interaction between the Dutch, and particularly the Dutch women here, and the men as they are marching off, maybe to their deaths. I want to talk a little bit about, and I'll let you pick who you want to talk about, one or two of the people who are the major characters here. There's like a dozen of them. And you mentioned you've got African Americans, you've got Jews, you've got
Native American.
A Native American and Jacob Herman, a chaplain. These are really interesting characters, and their life is well shared in the pages here. Pick one that you want to highlight.
Well, I'll speak less about one so I can tell you two, so we can have kind of an alpha and omega. So you have combat veteran Robert Cole, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole, who trained years earlier with a Lieutenant Colonel Dwight Eisenhower at Fort Lewis. And Cole was Ike's kind of guy, a take charge, lead from the front person that got stuff done. And here they would end up seeing each other again on June 5th on the tarmac in the UK, hours before Cole and his stick would jump out of an airplane over Normandy on late at night, June 5th, leading to June 6th. And Cole received a Medal of Honor for his heroic, almost crazy heroic performance at Carrington and near there off the beaches. And then he was involved in the drop on Market Garden. So he's a fascinating figure and is really kind of a larger-than-life Hollywood casting character. And then contrast that with Jacob Herman, who we mentioned, a Native American Lakota from South Dakota, whose family had been relocated 3 times going back to Wounded Knee in 1890s, and then 2 other times in the 1940s. And shortly before he volunteered because the Army wanted to use what was their reservation as a artillery practice. And his mother pleaded with him, don't do this, don't volunteer. All this country's ever done is stuff to us, not for us. But Jacob Herman, like other Lakota, had a creed. And when the country was attacked by Japan, then it was their responsibility to defend the land. And he wanted to join, and he joined and became a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne. So I just wanted people to remember we were a country of immigrants and a diverse country. We are a country of immigrants and a diverse country. I think we always will be. That has always been a strength of the country. And here you have 2 completely different life histories to get to this point, and yet both these guys are serving. They're both doing the best that they can do with the assignments they've got. And I think people are going to be very wedded to these characters, and our 2 twins who are both co-pilots, piloting the same plane, which is insane, but it was allowed to happen in 43. And you mentioned our chaplain, who's another heroic guy that just can't get close enough to the front, and finally succeeds in becoming a paratrooper in the 17th Airborne Division for the drop in varsity in March 45.
So this book, as I say, is sort of a story inside a story of World War II, and it touches on all kinds of things folks are going to be familiar with while they're learning about the things they're not familiar with. Certainly there's a touch of the Monuments Men. Ritchie boys are touched on in here.
Yeah.
I found the discussion on the caves and the murals in this section of the Netherlands very interesting. But before we run out of time, I want to do two things. If you pick up this book, which I encourage you to do, it's called Remember Us. It is on the Harper Horizon imprint. Make sure you read the epilogue. Don't stop when the book stops. Keep reading. This may be the best epilogue I've ever read, Robert. Really kind of helped close out some open issues about 80 years later. Where are things? And in that regards, I want you to talk about the Forever Promise Project.
The Forever Promise Project is reflective of my commitment. This is why I write the books that I've written. It's not to write books. It's not my favorite thing to do. My favorite thing is to tell some great stories and to try and change the world and make it a little bit better. We've done some amazing things through the Monuments Men and Women Foundation to make everyone aware of what the United States did during World War II to preserve cultural heritage. We set the standard for it. We made sure these men and women were honored. We have gotten the Army to reconstitute monuments officers through the Army Monuments Officer Training Program, AMOT. So a lot of amazing things, and that was the intent of writing the book, was to get a film made so that we could start changing this part of the world. I mean, small increments, but at least I'm paying my share of dues for the lottery ticket of having born in the United States. So what's the purpose with Remember Us? The answer is the Dutch have all 10,000 adopters for all 10,000 men and the 4 women that are buried there, 8,300 people buried and 1,700 names on walls of the missing. But they only have 20% of the name and addresses of the American next of kin. And they want to talk, they want to be in touch with the other 8,000 Americans that they're watching over that they don't have family connections for. In some cases, these families have photographs or unfinished letters that the family members have never seen, but they don't have anyone to send it to. So the Monuments Men and Women Foundations entered into a joint venture with the Dutch Foundation for Adopting Graves, and we're calling it the Forever Promise Project because when the government refused to provide this information, our mother of 12, Emily, traveled to the United States and for 5 weeks lived with different family every night that had somebody buried overseas. She went to American Legion and VFW halls and talked to people, and to everyone she said, leave your boys with us. We'll watch over them like our own forever, a forever promise. And they have done that. So that's why we call it Forever Promise. If you go to the foreverpromise.org website, we have a searchable database of all 10,000 men and the 4 women that are buried in the Netherlands. And we're asking people to go there and see, do I have a relative that's there? And if so, there's a short questionnaire that pops up, and I mean really short. What's your connection to the person? Are you aware there's a grave adoption program? Are you in touch with your adopter? If you're not, would you like to be? Will you give us permission to share your contact information with our colleagues in the Netherlands so that we can, in a football sense, move the ball from the 20-yard line on the other end of the field all the way down to the end zone on the opposite end and get in touch and match up all 10,000 adopters with as close to 100% as we can get with the 10,000 American family members? That's the objective. We should do it. It's the call to action. And I will talk about this till I'm put in a grave, but I can't, I need the help of the American public to help us help the Dutch do what they've been doing for 80 years.
No, that's why I say you got to read to the end. You got to get to this. This is really an important book that you've written here, Robert Edsel, with Brett Witter. You've educated us on things we didn't know and reminded us of some of the costs associated with liberating Europe. And let's see if we can't get more folks to reach out for the Forever Promise Project and link up some more of those names. And we certainly are appreciative of this book and what the Dutch are doing. I suspect this book will get translated into Dutch, and you're going to be a hero and sought after as a speaker in the Netherlands. Robert,
well, we've already gotten it translated into Dutch because I wanted to make sure the elderly people there that don't speak English can read their own story in their own language.
Perfect.
But look, a closing comment. For all we've gotten done with Monuments Men, and we've gotten done a lot, nothing's more important than our freedom, and that's what this book's about. And without our freedom, none of the other stuff matters. So this is where the knife's edge is right now around the world, is freedom and having that freedom. And this is as I said, a call to action for everybody. So go to foreverpromise.org and help us out. And by all means, get the book, because it'll help you understand how this situation evolved and this high point of humanity for what the Dutch have done and continue to do.
Well, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to Veterans Radio today.
Thank you very much.
We want to give you a little advance notice. We're going to have a Veterans Radio event on Sunday, September 28th, 2025. Radio on the River. We're doing a new location on Freedom River in Livingston County, Michigan. We want you to save the date. We're going to have veteran storytelling and guest speakers. We'll have raffle items, great local musicians and food. Also, uniquely, there's going to be an opportunity to fly in a UH-1 Huey from the Michigan Flight Museum. And maybe you can also win a free ride that way. But plan on supporting Veterans Radio either by buying tickets or sponsoring. Radio on the River. Contact us at dale@veteransradio.org or jim@veteransradio.org to get more information, but we'd love to have you come out, and we'd certainly love to have you sponsor. And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA, can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. And PuroClean, a leader in property emergency services. It's the paramedics of property damage, providing water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold and biohazard cleanups. You can reach them at puroclean.com or 800-775-7876. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's chapter 310. VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.